On a quiet June day in 2016, the world didn't just lose a champion. It gathered to say goodbye to a man who had become something far bigger than boxing. Muhammad Ali passed away on June 3, 2016, after a long battle with Parkinson's disease. For over 5 decades, Ali had stood as a symbol of courage, defiance, and charisma. From the moment he shocked the world by defeating Sonny Liston in 1964, to his refusal to be drafted into the Vietnam War, Ali wasn't just an athlete. He was a movement. His funeral, held in his hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, was planned not just as a ceremony, but as a global farewell. This wasn't an ordinary funeral. It became one of the most widely viewed memorials in modern history. People from every corner of the world tuned in, not just to mourn a boxer, but to honor a man who stood for equality, faith, and humanity. Leaders, celebrities, and everyday fans came together, because Ali had touched all their lives in different ways. What made the moment truly unforgettable was a realization that even in death, Ali had brought the world together, just like he always did in life. The man who once divided opinion with his bold stance had, in the end, united millions in grief and respect. But while the world watched from afar, something even more powerful was happening on the streets of Louisville. For one day, an entire city paused, because its greatest son was coming home one last time. Louisville, Kentucky, the place where Ali was born as Cassius Clay, became the heart of the world during his funeral procession. The city had always been proud of him, even during the years when his beliefs made him controversial. Now, decades later, those same streets were filled with love, respect, and remembrance. Thousands gathered along the route as Ali's casket was carried to the neighborhoods that shaped him, why it mattered or was popular. This moment symbolized something deeper than mourning. It was a full-circle journey. The boy who once ran through these streets dreaming of greatness was now being honored as one of the most important figures in modern history. The sheer number of people who showed up, many who had never met him, proved that Ali belonged not just to Louisville, but to the world. What stood out wasn't just a crowd. It was a silence. Despite the thousands present, there was a deep, almost sacred quietness. People weren't cheering like they did during his fights. They were reflecting. And in that silence, you could feel the weight of everything Ali had meant. Among those walking closest to him that day were some of the most unexpected yet meaningful figures, including a man who once feared him. He was once the most feared boxer in the world, but on this day, Mike Tyson walked in silence, paying tribute to the man who made his career possible. Mike Tyson grew up idolizing Muhammad Ali. As a troubled kid in Brooklyn, Tyson found inspiration in Ali's confidence and dominance. Under the guidance of trainer Cus D'Amato, Tyson studied Ali's fights obsessively, even though their styles were completely different. Ali's grace versus Tyson's raw aggression. The influence was undeniable. Ali wasn't just a hero to Tyson. He was a blueprint. Tyson's presence as a pallbearer carried deep symbolic meaning. It represented the passing of the torch, from one era of boxing greatness to another. Fans saw it as a powerful moment. The student honoring the master. Tyson, who had lived a turbulent life filled with controversy, stood there as a humble man, acknowledging the giant whose shadow he once stood under. What many didn't see was Tyson's internal struggle. Known for his intensity, Tyson appeared unusually quiet, almost fragile. In interviews later, he admitted that Ali's death hit him deeply. It was like losing a part of himself. The fighter who once seemed invincible was now just another man saying goodbye to his hero, and standing beside Tyson was another figure whose connection to Ali came not from the ring, but from the screen. He once stepped into Ali's shoes for a movie, but now, Will Smith was carrying him in real life to in 2001. Will Smith portrayed Muhammad Ali in the biographical film Ali. To prepare for the role, Smith spent months studying Ali's movements, voice, and personality. Over time, the role became more than just acting. It became a personal transformation. Smith developed a deep respect and emotional connection with the man he portrayed. Seeing Will Smith as a pallbearer added a unique layer to the funeral. He represented how Ali's story transcended sports and entered popular culture. Through Smith's performance, a new generation had been introduced to Ali's greatness. Now, the actor stood among real-life legends, bridging the gap between as cameras captured the moment. Many noticed Smith's emotional expression. This wasn't performance. This was grief. The man he had studied so closely, whose spirit he had tried to embody, was now gone. And for a brief moment, it felt as though Smith wasn't just saying goodbye as an actor, but as someone who had truly known him, transitioned. But being chosen to carry Ali's casket wasn't just about fame or connection. It was about something far deeper in Hollywood and history. Out of millions who admired him, only a handful were chosen to carry him, and every step they took told a story. Historical background/context. In many cultures, being a pallbearer is one of the highest honors you can receive. For Muhammad Ali's funeral, the selection was carefully considered. Family members, close friends, and individuals who represented different parts of Ali's life were chosen. It wasn't just about who was famous. It was about who truly reflected his journey. The presence of figures like Mike Tyson and Will Smith showed how wide Ali's influence had spread. From boxing to entertainment, from activism to global leadership, Ali had touched countless worlds. The pallbearers symbolized that reach. They were living proof of the different lives he had impacted. As they lifted the casket, there was a powerful, unspoken realization. Even legends cannot carry everything alone. The man who had once carried the hopes of millions was now being carried by those he inspired. It was a humbling, almost poetic reversal. And as they walked together, something unexpected became clear. A silent bond had formed among them all, a brotherhood beyond boxing. In that solemn moment, it didn't matter who was a champion, a celebrity, or a leader. Everyone stood equal in the presence of one man's legacy. Muhammad Ali's life connected people across industries and ideologies. From fighters to politicians, activists to entertainers, Ali built relationships that went far beyond boxing. His stance on civil rights, religion, and global peace made him a figure respected not just for his talent, but for his courage. At his funeral, this wide circle of influence became visible in one place. This gathering wasn't just rare, it was symbolic. You had people from completely different walks of life standing shoulder to shoulder. It showed that Ali's influence had erased boundaries. He wasn't just admired. He was deeply respected by people who didn't even share his background or beliefs. What made it powerful was the silence between them. These were individuals used to being in the spotlight. Yet in that moment, none of them tried to stand out. It was as if Ali's presence had humbled everyone, creating a quiet brotherhood built on respect. And as this brotherhood formed, it became clear this wasn't just a funeral, it was a global moment. The funeral that felt like a world event. Hook's statement. It looked less like a funeral, and more like a historic gathering the entire world had been invited to. Leaders, celebrities, athletes, and dignitaries traveled from across the globe to attend Muhammad Ali's funeral in Louisville. The ceremony was broadcast internationally, with millions watching live. It wasn't just covered as news. It was treated as a major global event, reflecting Ali's unmatched influence. Very few individuals in history have the power to unite such a diverse audience. Ali was one of them. His life had crossed borders, geographically, culturally, and politically. People who had never watched a boxing match still felt connected to him. That's why the world tuned in, not for sport, but for legacy. What stood out was how personal it felt despite its global scale. Even though millions were watching, the ceremony carried an intimate tone, as if everyone, no matter where they were, felt like they had lost someone close. And then came a voice that captured everything Ali stood for, delivered by someone who once led a nation. Bill Clinton's powerful words. When Bill Clinton stepped forward, the room fell into complete silence, because everyone knew something unforgettable was about to be said. Bill Clinton had admired Muhammad Ali for years, not just as an athlete, but as a humanitarian. During the funeral, Clinton delivered one of the most memorable speeches of the ceremony. He spoke about Ali's contradiction, his boldness, his kindness, his flaws, and how those made him human and relatable. The speech resonated because it didn't try to paint Ali as perfect. Instead, it showed him as real. Clinton reminded the audience that Ali's greatness came not just from his victories, but from his willingness to stand up for what he believed in, even when it cost him everything. At one point, Clinton highlighted how Ali chose his battles, not just in the ring, but in life. And in doing so, he made the audience realize something deeper. Ali's greatest fights were never against opponents. They were against injustice. As the speech ended, emotions ran high. And for many in the room, holding back tears became impossible the silent tears of legends. These were people who had faced pressure, fame, and history, but nothing prepared them for this moment. The funeral brought together some of the most recognizable faces in the world. Athletes, actors, and leaders who were used to controlling their emotions in public suddenly found themselves overwhelmed. Cameras captured subtle moments, watery eyes, bowed heads, and quiet reflections. Seeing powerful figures show vulnerability made the moment even more real. It reminded everyone watching that no matter how strong or successful someone is, loss affects us all the same. Ali had touched these individuals not as icons, but as people. What made it even more moving was a lack of words. No speeches, no grand gestures, just silence and emotion. In that stillness, the depth of their respect became clearer than anything they could have said. And among those reflecting deeply was a man whose entire career had been shaped by Ali's influence. Ali's lifelong impact on Mike Tyson. For Mike Tyson, this wasn't just a farewell. It was the closing of a chapter that had defined his entire life. Mike Tyson's journey into boxing was heavily influenced by Muhammad Ali. As a young fighter, Tyson studied Ali's matches, his movement, and his confidence. While Tyson developed his own aggressive style, the inspiration was always there. Ali had set the standard for what it meant to be more than just a fighter. Tyson's presence at the funeral symbolized continuity. It showed how Ali's legacy lived on through the fighters who came after him. Fans saw Tyson not just as a former champion, but as a representative of Ali's lasting influence on the sport. What made it powerful was Tyson's quiet demeanor. Known for his intensity, he appeared deeply reflective, almost subdued. It was as if, in that moment, he wasn't Iron Mike anymore. He was just a student saying goodbye to the teacher who changed his life. As Tyson reflected, the streets outside were filling with people, turning the farewell into something even bigger than anyone expected. The streets outside began to swell long before the procession arrived. People didn't just come, they gathered, slowly at first, then in waves, until it felt like the entire city had stepped out to witness history. Some stood quietly with folded hands. Others held up photographs, old gloves, or newspaper clippings from decades past. Many had never seen Muhammad Ali in person, yet somehow they felt connected to him. As the motorcade passed, a hush moved through the crowd like a ripple. It wasn't planned, it wasn't announced, it just happened. In that moment, Louisville wasn't just hosting a funeral. It was carrying the weight of a man who had once carried its name to the world. And for a brief stretch of road, it felt like time itself slowed down, allowing everyone a final chance to say goodbye. That journey through the city held a deeper meaning than most realized. The route wasn't random. It traced the places that had shaped Ali's life. The neighborhoods where he'd grown up, the streets where he'd first dreamed of becoming a champion, the landmarks that had witnessed his rise from Cassius Clay to a global icon. It was as if the city itself was part of the ceremony, quietly telling the story of his life without a single word. People pointed, whispered, and reflected, not just on who he became, but on where he started. And in that quiet reflection, something powerful emerged. Greatness doesn't come from nowhere. It is built, step by step, in places just like these, among those closest to the casket. The emotional weight continued to grow. Will Smith, who had once spent months studying Ali's every move, now found himself walking beside him in silence. This wasn't a role he had prepared for. There were no cameras to perform for, no lines to remember, just the reality of loss. Those who watched closely could see in his face the effort to stay composed, the quiet struggle to hold everything together. For Smith, Ali had been more than a character. He had been a presence, a spirit that lingered long after the film ended. And now, that presence was gone. Behind the scenes, decisions about who would stand closest to Ali in this final moment had not been simple. The selection of pallbearers carried its own quiet significance. It wasn't just about fame or recognition. It was about representation. Each person chose and reflected a different chapter of Ali's life. His family, his faith, his influence on sports, and his impact on culture. The choices told a story of their own, one that stretched across decades and continents. It was a reminder that Ali's life could never be defined by a single role or identity. He was many things to many people. And in this final act, all of those identities came together. As the ceremony unfolded, the presence of other sporting greats added another layer to the moment. Champions who had once dominated arenas, who had felt the roar of crowds and the pressure of expectation, now stood quietly in respect. There was no competition here, no spotlight to chase, just a shared understanding of what it meant to reach the top, and what it meant to lose someone who had redefined it. In their stillness, there was a kind of unity that words couldn't capture. They weren't just honoring a fellow athlete. They were honoring the standard he had set, the path he had carved, and the legacy he had left behind. And yet, for all its scale and significance, the ceremony never lost its sense of purpose. It reflected the very beliefs that had guided Ali throughout his life: faith, equality, and compassion. Prayers were offered, not just for his soul, but for the world he had tried to change. Messages of unity echoed through the space, reminding everyone that Ali's fight had never been limited to the ring. He had stood for something larger, something that continued even after his passing. And in that moment, it became clear that this wasn't just a farewell. It was a continuation. But as powerful as a public tribute was, some of the strongest moments came from those who stood closest to him, not in fame, but in love.